Thank you so much for Charles and this Diversity of Thought conference. This is incredible being here. I was invited by Paul Rossi, one of the smartest men I know. It's funny, I talked, the first time I reached out to Paul Rossi was after he was on the Jordan Peterson podcast. And I said, could we have a conversation on my podcast, the Inconvenient Minority Podcast? And he said, yes. And so we came over and we started to have a conversation. And within like 30 minutes, we started off with his experience, at his school. And then within 30 minutes, we were talking about, the etymology of the word education. And we invented a new word called seducation, which is a portmanteau of seduce and educate. So seducation, this is your new word. Exactly, we don't need no seducation. I came here to talk about my new book, An Inconvenient Minority, and what it has to say about the world. So, why did I write this book, An Inconvenient Minority, which is about Asian American excellence, the inconvenience that it poses, the left's narrative on race, and what we can do to fight for true meritocracy? Why did I write this book? Well, it was in college, and I was having this conversation with this friend of mine, who was a roommate of mine, actually. And, we were talking about affirmative action. I was always against affirmative action. So I posed the question. And my other friend was Asian, by the way, just like me. So I posed this to my friend. I was like, well, why are you for, the discrimination of Asian Americans in Harvard admissions and everything like that? And he said, well, I think we as a country need diversity. And normally, when I, make this argument against affirmative action, I would talk about, okay, well, we don't want racial preferences, we want equality, we don't want discrimination. But this time, I had a different idea, an idea that just struck me, because he said diversity, and I was just thinking, aren't Asians diverse? Aren't we part of this diversity metric? So that's what I asked him. I said, wait. Asians aren't diverse. And he said, oh, well, no, sure, they're diverse, but Kenny, do you really want a Harvard class that's 50% Asian? And I looked at him, and I said, who cares? Why do you care? And then I realized, in that moment, something that had never occurred to me before, but it had synthesized everything in my experience. That for a very long time in my childhood, from my childhood to college to now, me and the other people of my race have been fed this ideology that says, you need to make room for other people. You need to make room for other people. I realized that people of my generation and my race have been peddled this ideology by Harvard University and by the prestige gods that have dominated our society for so long, in an effort to get Asians to doubt themselves, to doubt their own merit, to doubt their own deservingness for a place such as Harvard. Because the more that Asians are able to doubt, the more that Harvard can get Asian Americans to doubt their place in the world based on merit, the more they can get them to say, okay, I won't fight you on this, I'll relinquish this. And I see this happening in my own culture and in my own community. I was talking with a Google employee, an employee at Google. By the way, Google is 55%. The technology sector of Google is 55% Asian American, and most of these Asian Americans are Chinese American, and Indians. And I talked with this guy, and we just started having a conversation about diversity at Google and everything like that. And we got to the point where he told me, well, Kenny, I feel like, we could do a better job of diversity at Google. And I said, what do you mean by diversity at Google? And he said, well, all of these Asians come and they hire other Asians and everything like that, and that and it results, we don't have enough diversity of perspectives at Google. And I'm thinking in my head, okay, that may be true, but how is this not also true of every other race? Like, we know blacks hire blacks, we know whites hire whites, we know country club people hire other country club people, but why do you suddenly feel guilty over the fact that maybe you're more likely to hire an Asian American? Why is it you specifically who has to relinquish this and feel guilty about this when nobody else seems to care? I don't think the NBA cares that, it's primarily, black Americans who recruiting other black Americans as well. I don't think the NBA cares about this, so why do Asian Americans have to care about this? So I realize now that this Harvard ideology of judging people based on background is about more than just affirmative action. It's more than just about diversity, or it's more than just about any of the things that we are talking about here today. It's a mental takeover. That's what it is. It's a mental takeover designed to get people to relinquish their self-confidence and self-worth. So, my book, An Inconvenient Minority, The Attack on Asian American Excellence and the Fight for Meritocracy, traces this Harvard case and the lingering effects, the effects of what's going on in our country, on how it affects ordinary people. Because I remember when I was in high school, everybody, I went to Princeton High School. It was a diverse high school, lots of different people, different races and everything like that. And, I was one of many Asians who wanted to get into Ivy League universities. And I remember, because of the higher standards that Harvard and Princeton and Yale put upon people like me, that by college application time, the Asians who were my friends, I no longer saw them as friends. I saw them as my competitors. Because I realized that these Ivy League universities that all of us wanted to get into were not going to judge us based on the entire student body or the entire class. They were going to judge us based on other Asians within our school. And so our primary competition became the other Asians at the school. You see, this is what raising standards arbitrarily on the basis of background does to a culture. This is what it does to people. It raises the competition culture to 120%. And these Asian Americans are already being drilled, not, I wouldn't say drilled, but they're being pushed by their parents. It is a stress ball of anxiety at times. And that stress ball of anxiety is made even more stressful and more anxious because of a university that doesn't want too many of them. This is deep, and it goes deep, deeply rooted in who Asian Americans, especially second-generation Asian Americans like me and my friends, believe that they are. And that psychology is the subject of my book, An Inconvenient Minority. Now, this is not a symptom that is unique to Asian Americans. It's not a symptom unique to Asian Americans. It's a symptom that has developed from the critical race framework for all races, for all people. You see, think about these diversity trainings that you guys are in. Think about these diversity trainings that you guys are fighting in the schools. What's the first thing that a diversity training or an anti-racist training or Ibram Kendi coming to speak, what's the first thing they try to do? What's the first thing they try to do before they tell you to, advance equity and do anti-racism and everything like that? The first thing they try to do is to get you to believe that you are a racist. That's the first thing. Exactly. That is the first thing that they do, because everything else follows. As soon as they can get you to admit that you are a racist, they'll throw everything at you. They'll throw everything. Unconscious bias, implicit bias, you're complicit in white oppressive structures, you just, even though you're colorblind, you're not really colorblind. You actually secretly hate black people on the inside. They'll throw everything at you until they get you to admit it. Until they get you to admit it. Okay, fine. Maybe I am a little racist. Maybe I do have some unconscious bias. Aha! Aha! As soon as you admit that, they've got you. They've got you. Because now they can say, well, that's bad, right? Yeah, it's kind of bad. Well, we need to reform that. We need to reform that through anti-racism. And let me show you how we can reform it through anti-racism. We're going to get you to, in some ways, repent for the sin, the unconscionable sin that you have in your heart of this unconscious bias that you have against minorities, even though you never thought you were a racist, but you are. And once they get you to admit it, then they can get you into all of these other sort of paths. This is what anti-racism is. This is what critical race training is. And for those of you in this room who really understand it, you know that this is the first step. This is how they get you in. It really is a cult. It really is a way to lure you in and then spit you out, a different person. So, what's the solution? What's the solution to all this? Do we have unconscious biases? Studies show we don't. Studies show only 5% of lab-induced discrimination could be attributed to racial bias. Meta-analysis 2012. Studies show that white Americans actually are the race that puts the least amount of preference in polls between their race and other races in terms of warmth-cold feelings. I don't know what that means. But I haven't seen enough evidence to suggest that people are unconsciously biased in a systematic way against people. But what I have seen the evidence is pointing to is the need for color blindness. That's the last point I want to close with. The need for color, and then I'll answer questions. The need for color blindness. See, I'm part of an organization. I'm president of Color Us United, colorusunited.org. And we fight for color blindness. And people are scared of this word, color blindness, because they think, because the culture tells, oh, we all see race, everything like that. But what's the ideal? What's the ideal? The ideal is to treat people on the basis of merit, not their race. And by the way, this is the ideal that people of all colors want, whether they're Asian or white or black or Hispanic. I'll give you an example. As president of the organization, I have the fortune of talking with a lot of ordinary black Americans who have no interest in being either a tenured African American studies professor or a DC politician lobbyist career. And I asked them, and I asked them about their experiences, their own lives. And uniformly, these black Americans come and tell me, yeah, I'm black, but I'm also this. And I'm also all of this. And the culture doesn't see me that way because they only see me as black. There was a skateboarder that I talked to, he in Trenton, New Jersey, who opened his own nonprofit skating park. And he tells me, yes, I'm black, and people see that I'm black, but what people don't see is that I'm a Christian. And I face discrimination within my own black community for being a Christian every day. These are things that we don't see. These are things that critical race theory these are boxes that critical race theory forces people into. This box of race. You are your race. We assume things about you because of your race. Ultimately speaking, minorities don't want that. They don't want to be assumed. They want to be talked to. They want somebody to have a conversation with them and approach them and say, hey, how are you doing? They don't want somebody to come up to them and say, hey, how are you struggling today based on victimhood? I was talking, and there was this one girl that I met at church once, and she was an African-American woman, and we were talking about this, and she said, I don't like it that I go to these cocktail parties and people are coming up and asking me, how oppressed am I? Because of the current administration, which at the time was the Trump administration. Then she leans into me and she says, I voted for Trump. Ultimately, this is the foundation that we need to rest on. If we truly care about diversity, if we truly care about judging people on the content of their character, not the color of their skin, we need to strive to not assume things about people. We need to strive to treat every person that we come to with equal dignity and respect. That's what color blindness is about. That's why I'm here. That's why I'm president of Colorists United. Thank you.
Thank you,
Taking questions.
I left my laptop, so if we have the microphone there. If anybody wants to ask him any questions, while you all think about it, I will ask you one.
Sure.
I like the story at the end with the woman. So, and we did it when we were doing the podcast. A couple other people kind of hinted to it. So what do we do about the fact that, one, we have the problem of a growing number of people within these communities speaking up? Because the norms in Asian, black community, they all know that this stuff is crazy, but they're not paying attention to it. But the fact that the microphone is controlled by whites, so whites are speaking the narrative, so you have white people saying, let me tell you what's happening in the black community and what black people think. Let me tell you what the Asian community, and we don't get to grab the mic because they're like, stop it, I'm helping you. Don't touch the mic, I got this. Yeah. My white privilege. So you want to talk about white privilege, there it is. So how do we get the microphone from them? Because they're speaking for us.
Right. Well, I mean, you have to speak up for yourself fundamentally. I mean, you have to understand that so here's something I always tell Asian Americans when I speak to them. No one is going, ultimately, this country is a country where if you don't, this country is a country where you can get by on, you can do really well on the basis of merit, but if you ignore politics completely, if you ignore speaking up for your own equal rights, it can come back to haunt you. I'll give you the example of the Chinese Exclusion Act. So you have these Chinese people, who immigrated to this country. They didn't even know English, but they were basically imported here to work on the gold mines and the railroads. And they worked really hard. They worked their butts off. They starved. They also actually were more productive than the white miners in the same place. But because of that, because they were more productive, the white miners, resented that because they were taking their jobs. And then the white miners turned to this labor leader named Dennis Kearney, who was basically a demagogue. And Dennis Kearney basically pitted the white miners against the Chinese immigrants. And he said, they're scurs, they're curs, they are foul-smelling people. Get them out. And the Chinese Americans did not know how to speak for themselves because they didn't know how to speak English. They didn't know anything about the political system, and they just got completely demolished. And you know, they were able to ram through the Chinese Exclusion Act and, you know, ban several generations of Chinese Americans from coming to this country further. So, you know, what you need to learn about the history of this country is that if you don't speak up for yourself, nobody's going to speak up for you.
That's true. Anyone else? Any questions? This book. No? I want to add something to that piece that's important, though, before we go, that we were talking about the 1619 Project, and there's a piece, I write about it, but in comments from Nicole Hannah-Jones, she basically says that immigrants have, you know, I can't believe you people are speaking up. You should be thanking your lucky stars for all the things that we blacks have done for you. You would have no success if not for the Civil Rights Act, as if they weren't here before that, right? So I think that, I asked earlier if you all had read it. I think that you really should, because it's being taught in all the schools, regardless of what happens with CRT. But Kenny, thank you. You can get his book afterwards. He'll be here, you know, selling these. And Kenny, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.